Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We are so excited to be here with you. Today, we're talking about how COVID changed us. We're currently emerging out of this deep state of transformation. We connect to our jobs differently. We have higher expectation towards our leaders and our workplaces. And with this continuous push for more work, without even taking a minute and a look at how effective we are in doing our jobs, a lot of us are feeling disconnected and less engaged at work because it's just become a little much. But there is good news. Hybrid work experiences and just in general, working in this new era doesn't have to feel draining or demotivating, quite the opposite. And so today we're talking about how you can lead from a place of authenticity, connection, and intrinsic motivation, and how this can reignite you from within as well as your team from within. Before we dive in, leave a comment about what your challenges are in a hybrid workplace. We would love to bring and include and integrate your questions into this live session. So, Tirza, Lumen's been transforming people for over 7 years. You've been transforming people for over 7 years. Why is authentic leadership important to us feeling connected and engaged at work?
Thanks, Helena. And, I wanted to avoid starting with authenticity because it's such a slippery topic. And yet it is the root from like where all great leadership comes from, which is that place where I am aware of myself. I am clear on myself, what I'm feeling, my own thoughts, my own expression. From there, I can be choosing what I'm bringing forth into the situation. But that authenticity of I can feel myself. It's safe for me to feel myself. Is where we can really learn to trust ourselves and take ownership of what's in front of us. So when we're in a hybrid setting and we're doing a lot of our work through the screens, it becomes easier for us to kind of ignore hard conversations, things that are bothering us, work that isn't working, ways of coming together that aren't working, places where we're out of agreement. But and we have these like, "Ugh, this isn't working, these feelings and these knowing that this isn't working. But in a hybrid setting, we can kind of just keep going easier. But if we're being really truly authentic with ourselves, we create space for these conversations so that we can come together well and authentically and let people know what's happening for us. And so it really just starts with that willingness to be authentic, to feel my own feelings, to see what I see, and then take responsibility for what's happening and know that like the only place I have real power and agency is in changing myself. And so I can take responsibility for everything that's showing up in my world and then move into a place of ownership for what can I do to change this? What kinds of questions can I ask? What kinds of conversations can I have? And that is the beginning of authentic leadership. And I really, as slippery as it is, as challenging as it is to even begin to think about authenticity, it's the root of building great leadership, especially in a hybrid world.
And going a little off script here, but what are ways that you create that space for yourself to show up authentically? Because a lot of us are in back to back meetings and we feel like there's so much that we need to deal with. There's just little space for those very human needs and to talk about emotions. And it's also very uncomfortable to talk about emotions. And many of us aren't used to talking about emotions. What is a way that you create that space for yourself?
Yeah. So um, we use the Connect, Scan, Focus, Act framework. And that means in every meeting, we're creating that moment for connection. And if I'm seeking to come authentically, I am in that connection looking to create a space for myself to be authentic and for everyone who's in the meeting to come to a place of authenticity. And so if I just even am creating the practice of coming back to authenticity at the beginning of every meeting, it becomes a practice. And I begin to take ownership of how is the meeting going how are my meetings actually turning out? What's being created in them? And every time coming back to connect and how am I going to make this my next best meeting ever? So that's the basic tool that I keep using is connect, scan, focus, act. From there, you can also take a moment, connect, scan, focus, act with myself between meetings, but that becomes really hard. And so if all we're doing is just using the connect, scan, focus, act framework for all of our meetings, we will create more authenticity in ourselves and on our teams.
What I love about that framework since working with Lumen is the Connect definitely allows for that offloading in some instances, which allows us to like refocus on what actually needs to be discussed. But the scanning can also be like, okay, we need to talk about this. Like there's been a broken agreement or there has been. So it leaves it open enough there. It's like not just the technicalities that need to be discussed, but it's also, okay, almost in a form of a mini retrospective and
Mhm.
like, okay, we need to clarify this and we need to be more clear on how we're handling this situation. I
Mhm.
love
And
that.
because we don't consider agendas like locked in stone, there's always a scan to reset the agenda. It becomes very egalitarian that anybody can put something on the list of things to be discussed. And even if it's this thing needs another meeting, we can't hold this conversation here. Things begin to get on the calendar that wouldn't otherwise get on the calendar. Those conversations that are easy to ignore.
I love that so much. Speaking of connecting, what else plays an important role for leaders in hybrid settings to feel like they're actually genuinely connecting not only to their teams but also to themselves in hybrid spaces?
Mhm. So it's I spoke last week and I focused first on having people connect to their own purpose. And it just really reignited for me why connecting to my purpose brings out so much clarity and energy for my work. When we have a sense of like purpose and some bigger why, we will contribute in a whole different way. We have a new reservoir of energy to bring and a new reservoir of availability because any really good why can't be done by one person. It's inclusive of our team. So when I connect to myself, I'm bringing this new sense of energy. But when I um, want to actually like bring that for others, I can create a space for them to connect to their why. And it isn't to force that or to make it like you need to know your why, but actually even to just create the space to care. Because what we'll find is that people are bringing a sense of purpose to everything they do. There's a why that ties their work inside of work and outside of work. And when you can connect to that, you know what's really important to each of your people. And that brings the opportunity then, okay, if this is what's important to you, how am I supporting you to bring your best work to the job? And once we begin to focus on that place of how can I support my team, we're really coming with care that takes care of the individuals, which is what we all really want in work. We want to know that our work matters and that can ask for what we need to do our best work.
What I love about that is when we do the work to be in touch with our purpose, to be continuously on this journey of self-discovery and understanding our why, which can take a few iterations, and we are transparent about that process and we're allowing for vulnerability. What I love about that is that people find that very relatable.
Mhm.
So it just makes you more human and relatable. And so automatically the aspect of us being able to empathize and care for one another is just increased through that.
Mhm. And I hear then from leaders like, "Oh, well, like that takes time." And we'll just have to be accepting that we're not going to have the same level of productivity. And I think this is just a really misguided viewpoint on what productivity looks like and what contributes to productivity. Because I really find, especially in our modern workforce and in our modern, with the modern set of tools that we have, now more than ever, it's about our capacity for output, not the number of hours. How well we're working together, how well we're using all of the tools we have available to us for automation, for like added intelligence, for collaboration across our different departments. When we're really working at our full capacity, our productivity really just accelerates and goes through the roof. But we don't get to that level of exceptional productivity without investing the time in intentional collaboration, the time in building our team, how we're working together, and how we're continuously incorporating new tools. And so that doesn't need to be like a ton of time, an hour a week of intentional time together, working on how we're working together changes everything. And I find it really just like unbelievable that people think that soccer teams need to practice and football teams need to practice, but somehow work teams, especially ones that are continuously reforming, should somehow just be able to like step in and do their best work. And it's just not what we expect of any other type of team. So, finding ways to take the time, whether that's in a Friday retro, the day you all come into the office is a great time. If there is a day where we're coming into the office, taking an hour of intentional time of how are we working together, and how can we support each other better will really increase the productivity all the rest of the hours.
Mhm. Mhm. I love that. I the situations, the work environments that I used to work in, we sometimes wanted to sit around a table and have those conversations, but we and we tried to, but there was just a lack of, okay, well, what's a better way of doing it? What
Right.
is a better way? What could we be doing better? And there was almost like a lack of ideas and a lack of tools
Hmm.
in terms of, well, maybe we should talk about how we're going to be splitting this work. And then there was like, well, what are the options? How could we be doing a better job? And so you just kind of default to old ways of doing things. What would you say to that? What is some support or a tool? Could connect, scan, focus, act be applied here as well? Or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really great question. So it's it's natural that we default to our old ways of working. And, and when we were all in the office together, we had decent work process and ways of working together that happened because of proximity. And it wasn't that it was exceptional, but proximity could kind of overcome a lot of gaps. Like, we had a little bit of time where we saw each other, like, bumped into each other. There was just, like, a little bit of natural, like, social time, and the ability to just see each other dealt with the lack of process. Now we have neither. And so, people we need to reinvest in how we're building great process, and I think that this is a conversation of process and culture. The how does my work relate to your work? And how can we create a more efficient process for how our work is happening together? And then how do my ways of working affect your ways of working? And how do we create a culture of working together that works for all of us? And so I think this is as we're in this strategic planning time of year, I think it's a really great time for us to clarify not just what direction are we heading and what are our goals, but how does our work relate? What does our work process look like now in order to deliver on those goals? And then how are we going to work together? What's our culture? And really thinking through like 2024 is going to bring with it all kinds of massive changes, new technologies, changes in AI, changes in the global systems. And we're going to need to innovate through 2024, even more than we had to innovate through 2023. So, as we're building that new work process and that new work culture, we also need to be asking ourselves, how are we going to innovate together through what is absolutely going to be a year of massive change?
Speaking of massive change and having to identify that, oh, we need processes. A big one for my team during the time was, okay, how can we break down the work into jobs to be done and define the definition of done, and then start to agree on kind of work in sprints during the week and say, okay, what are we shipping this week? What are we doing? And
Mhm.
how are we organizing around that? That
Mhm.
helped to reduce complexity, that helped so much. But as you speak of 2024 being even more transformative, and we're going to be asked to evolve our processes and our ways of doing even more and learn even more, how can purpose driven leaders that are typically intrinsically motivated because they want to do this thing, right? But not everyone is in that space. How can these individuals inspire others around them, their colleagues, that maybe are not as enthusiastic about all the change, right? We talk
Mhm.
about guardians, people who like to hold on to the way things were done in the past, and because there's a certain that's the right way of doing it, and so they need a little more convincing of trying something new. How can they help their colleagues be more intrinsically motivated to explore change and to go to go along?
Yeah. So intrinsic motivation has some basic components. It requires autonomy. So to find my motivation within, I have to believe that I have the autonomy to actually take action, and to do something new. So that's a sense of agency, that I have the permission to do something, and the capacity to do it on my own. The competence that I know how to do it. I have reliable tools and competence to deliver on what I want, the action I want to take. And I know I'm related. I'm held in a community, where I know my work matters. And so, as a leader trying to build intrinsic motivation on a team, appreciating that intrinsic motivation doesn't exist at the team level, it exists at the individual level. And
Mm.
so, for each individual, we need to create the space for them to understand and to be able to communicate to the team what they need to do their best work, where they see themselves heading. So, a sense of vision for what they're growing. So, what skills are they practicing and developing now? And what they want to be delivering or creating in the world. And so, we can't just give people the job description and expect a sense of intrinsic motivation. People will fulfill against a job description, but if we're looking for them to be motivated from within, that comes from their internal sense of purpose combined with the autonomy to do their job, the competence and skills to deliver on it, and an understanding of how their work relates to other people. Coming back to that, we need to understand how our work process is set up, how our work relates to other people, and then how our ways of working relate to other people. And that really becomes that root of intrinsic motivation. But we can't create intrinsic motivation by saying, okay, team, you're now all intrinsically motivated. That's not how it works.
So what I'm getting is more getting curious about, how do you feel like that allowance part that you mentioned, do you feel safe enough to try something new? Do you feel like are there open questions as to what tools you may need, or what's that knowledge gap that may be hindering you from taking a step? And what could be a good question for the relatedness aspect, do you think?
Yeah, it's how does our team understand how our work relates to one another? And
Mm,
I just want to emphasize to leaders, this isn't soft stuff. I think there's some idea that this is just about how everyone feels, but
mm,
it actually comes down to the really great work of process design, what we might have in the past called like a RACI model, understanding how our work goes from one person to the next and who actually has ownership over each step of the process. It's like fundamental work that helps us see how our things come together. And the real important thing is to really drive down that decision making to the person, who's like actually doing the work.
mm,
And as we're building those structures within our team, there's also the opportunity to bring in the side of the conversation that is, what does this mean to each of us, and how are we working together, the culture side.
mhm,
But it really is building process and culture that's delivering against a clear strategy.
mhm.
So this is like the fundamentals of building an organization. It's not just about like, how do we feel?
Mhm. I love that. Thanks for adding that. We often, speaking of that, right? We don't work in isolation. We are affected by how other parts of a system of an organization can affect us as a team. We don't work in silos anymore. Um, a dysfunctional workflow and culture of another team may actually influence our team negatively. How do we ensure that those dysfunctional parts of other inside the other organization doesn't impact our motivation and momentum? What are some ways we can overcome that?
Yeah. So we see this in organizations a lot between like marketing and sales, or marketing and engineering, or product and the product marketing managers. There's like this gap between how one team is working and the other team is working. And so the dysfunction may not even be that either side is necessarily dysfunctional inside their teams. It's when the work process is brought together. And the real solution to this is to get above the problem and put the customer at the center. But if we can't come together with the other team for whatever reason, um, we can really commit to like having an island of sanity on our team, to really being clear how we're working together on our team and how we're managing the challenges that we receive from the opposite team. And the important thing there is to not get gossipy, like to make sure that we're not running a narrative about those guys, but actually trying to come with compassion for why how they're working with us is dysfunctional.
Mm, great input. As we move forward, what are some of the real world experiences and examples, some success stories of teams and organizations that have successfully built these new capacities to accelerate innovation and deal with the ongoing change and actually drive it from within?
Yeah. So, um, the example that I love using for folks is Microsoft, because Microsoft has really undergone a cultural and innovation process change that has had them go from kind of the like evil kid on the block that with a stagnant culture and a stagnant product portfolio to really like having surpassed in market cap Google and Apple. And they've done it in a way that was focused on nonviolent communication, on elevating the individual, and on going from that idea that we're kind of know it alls around here to we're learn it alls. It's really a success story. We've also been part of just the incredible transformation that's been happening from inside Siemens, where two very like young entrepreneurs had the idea that if we started with intrinsic motivation and personal purpose, people would be more able to create innovation inside of this 175-year-old organization. And we've seen that program go for 7 years and like now like just continue to grow. Go back and watch our podcast with Ilaria. And but I feel like we're also seeing this elsewhere. I just heard about a case study that's going to be coming out in Harvard Business Review on the transformation at PG&E, which has gone from an organization in lawsuit and in court to one that is being led from a whole new place. And so I just for those leaders that are like, I can't imagine how my organization is going to change. Organizations do change, and change can happen relatively quickly. If it's done from that place that's including that how we're working together and um, how our work affects one another, that what are we doing and who are we being? When those two things come together, rapid transformation really can happen, even at our largest, oldest organizations.
I love that. I love that so much. Thank you so much for your insight, Tirza. And if you, here to my dear audience, if you too are interested in developing these capacities and these skills, these mindsets to drive and innovate from within your company during this new era that we're experiencing right now, do connect with us. Reach out to us. We at Lumen and train people at speed and scale, and training the skills and the tools to manage through ongoing change, enabling agile innovation and transformation. We've helped, as mentioned before, people transform and develop innovation skills at organizations like Siemens and other Fortune 500 companies for over 7 years to develop profitable new portfolios and accelerate time to market, as well as enhance customer focus during digitalization. So, thank you so much for tuning in. We're going to be connecting again live over my profile next week on regenerative leadership with Lumen co founder Philip Horvath. Super excited for this. And thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.